situation where you find that
not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that.
All right, the Daybreak, and it's talking about the dailies now on Daybreak. The stories that we'll be looking at will begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, and the first story there says gunmen attack Niger mosque, kill 18 worshippers. You will find that on page 6. NLC rejects compulsory COVID-19 vaccination. Find that on page 10 of the Daily Trust newspaper. The lead story talks about what we discussed yesterday. Buhari launches e-Naira, says GDP to rise by 11.9 trillion naira. Right after that, policy will aid government's welfare policy. 33 banks running e-currency as CBN mints 500 million naira. What do you need to know about e-Naira? So in case you want to know more about this Nigeria's e-Naira project, you can pick a copy of the Daily Trust. The details are there on page 5. The lead story shows you the president launching the e-Naira. That's the logo there, carried by the governor of Central Bank, presenting to the president of Nigeria. Then you have beside that senators kick as EFCC transfers forfeited assets to AGF office. Kano demands 1% special status in revenue allocation formula. That's just like we saw in the case of Lagos State seeking special status. Well, we'll get to know more about that if you pick the copy of the Daily Trust on page 6. Now, my mother-in-law asked me to poison my stepchildren, woman tells court, and that's on page 27. At the bottom of that, Northern Coalition asked court to exit Southeast from Nigeria. Well, that's the whole debate about secession and all of that. You can pick a copy to get more information about that on page 10 of Daily Trust newspaper, and that's that for that.
Okay, let's take a look at the stories on the Punch newspaper this morning. Right on page 8, you'd find federal government plans 5 million solar-powered households, 250,000 jobs. And you'd find on page 23 of the Punch newspaper, federal government to end petrol subsidy, June 2022. World Bank condemns 2.9 trillion naira funding. Investors scramble for FBNH shares. Price rises over ownership tussle. And on page 2, you'd find $148 million consultants pay. Buhari governors meet. October revenue sharing suspended. And the Punch newspaper is also leading with the unveiling of the e-Naira by President Muhammad Buhari. He also states MDAs may collect revenues, pay in e-currency. And one of the writers is saying Central Bank of Nigeria alerts banks to risks, fraud, threats. Apex Bank means 500 million naira e-Naira, issues 200 million to banks. Another rider also states e-Naira won't change Naira-dollar exchange rate. That's according to experts. And on page 10, you'd find Fashola, NLC folds federal government's asset sale. Privatization, minister demands audit. And on page 9, hoodlums storm Ogun school. 2 teachers hospitalized, others flee. And you'd also find PDP crisis deepens. Secondus pursues suit as party plans convention. These are some of the stories on the Punch this morning.
All right, next we'll be looking at the Nation newspaper, and the first story there says 10 held over lynching of police officer. You'd find 6 arrested in Nasarawa. That's the rider to that story. Gunmen kill 17, abduct 18 in mosque. Dawa raid in Niger. That's on page 3. The next story there says governors fail to access 51 billion naira UBEG funds. UBA posts 490.3 billion gross earnings in third quarter. And then you'd see also GDP to grow by $29 billion with e-Naira. And then the lead story says 2023, our politics rowdy but steer clear, Buhari tells envoys. The writer to that says President solicits direct investment. These are some of the major stories on The Nation this morning.
Okay, let's head to The Guardian this morning. The Guardian newspaper is also leading with the e-Naira going live as CBN floats a new scheme to boost economy. 33 banks join platform. CBN needs 500 million. Transactions on e-Naira free for 90 days. Another writer is also saying Buhari insists on close monitoring, says digital currency will boost GDP by $29 billion. You'd also find CBN says foreign reserve surpasses $40 billion. You'd also find Northwest demands lion's share of revenue allocation to states, local governments. You'd also find on The Guardian, don't force workers to vaccinate, NLC advises federal government. Fresh trouble for Ojikalu as federal government asks a court to order retrial in alleged 7.1 billion fraud. These are some of the stories you'd find on The Guardian.
All right, the paper that we'll be looking at, the last paper as a matter of fact, is a Blueprint newspaper, and beside the nameplate there by the right corner of the paper, manufacturing, CBN sets up financial instrument, the 100 for 100 PPPP. You'd find that on page 22, and then you would have also e-Naira will boost our GDP by $29 billion in 10 years. That's according to Buhari. World Bank blacklist 18 Nigerian companies, individuals on page 18. Ex-militants storm Governor Ayade's office over unpaid allowances. The lead story on the Blueprint, Sheikh Gumi to Yoruba Igbo clerics. Talk to IPOP, Igboho, as I talk to bandits. You'd find also the writer there saying he warns Buhari against declaring them terrorists. Stop tagging terrorism as banditry. That's according to Akeredolu. Also another story there says you are doing PR for gunmen. Omokri slams Gumi. Worshippers killed, 7 abducted in Niger mosque. That's on page 3 of the Blueprint newspaper. You would find below the pictorial there, Anambra Guba. NSA reads the riot act to astonish others. That's on page 5. And also 2022 budget, Senate committee rejects science minister's presentation. Police, FRSC, VIO responsible for hike in food prices. That's according to an investigation. And I'm curious, really, and if you're curious just like me, maybe you should pick a copy of the Blueprint newspaper to find out how is the police, the FRS and VIO responsible for the hike in food prices. You'd find Oyo jailbreak, FG enlists Interpol to recapture fleeing inmates. And then the final story there says PDP convention, ignore distractions, Makinde urges members. Well, these are some of the stories that we would find, that made their way to the headlines this morning. Let's welcome our reviewer again, Ali M. Ali. You're welcome. Good morning, and it's good to have you.
Nice to have you.
Good morning. Well, first time being here.
Yes.
So, good morning, good morning, viewers.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Nice to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining. Now, he's the editor-in-chief at People's Daily. Now, let's begin with the first story we saw. The story about the e-Naira is literally everywhere on the front pages of our newspapers, and the president seemed to be confident that this will, lead to the rise in GDP by 11.9 trillion naira. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, clearly, like you said, is the story that has dominated virtually all the headlines. If you look at all the papers, except for one or two, today is a question that you buy one, you read all. Virtually all the papers are leading with that story. Yes, and I think experts have said it's a welcome development. Perhaps it will help in stemming the tide of depreciation. The value of the nation's currency has depreciated over time because of, well, the CBN blames middlemen and speculators. Perhaps this will ease the glide in the value of the nation's currency. But if you look at the economy, experts will tell you that the value of the naira is still very strong. Locally, if you look at the purchasing parity of the naira, what it can buy here. For example, people make this argument that it's unfair to compare the naira with the dollar. That a dollar, which is the equivalent of 500 and something, if you look at it really, a dollar can fetch you, well, a decent meal. Even going by the proclamation of the former Minister of Agric that 30 naira can get you a meal that will make you belch, literally.
Wow.
Yeah, that is
in the same Nigeria.
Yes.
Well, I doubt about that because...
well, that is contestable. That is really contestable.
Yes.
So with the e-naira now, it will make a lot of things easier. That is, if you are transacting, according to the expert, is that you are actually getting the exact value that the electronic naira and the physical naira, they are of the same value, and they cannot be traded for profit like we are given to do with the physical naira, that is. And then if you look at, we're in the era of cashless economy, and I think this, for once, I agree with the expert that it will help inject perhaps new, fresh life to the naira. And like the president said, in 10 years, in about a decade, it will jack up the nation's GDP. But you see, jacking up the nation's GDP by a whopping 29 billion in a decade, well, that will remain in the realm of speculation because there are so many factors that would make that happen. One of which people have argued, listening to experts between yesterday and this morning, is the issue of, well, security or lack of it. So that would determine whether we get to that.
Exactly, like you said, a whole lot of factors, were pointed out by experts.
Yes.
And one of which is the issue of acceptability, like one of the experts raised yesterday. The big spenders, literally, most cases, they don't even trade in naira anymore. They trade in dollars and all of that. So in terms of acceptability, within that circle, how far do you see this going?
Yes, well, that's one very naughty issue there, because why the value of the naira has depreciated over time is because of the pressure on it by people who rather, even ordinary Nigerians now, those who can afford, they rather save in dollars than in naira, because if you have, a year ago, if you had 1 million a year ago at about now, notwithstanding post-COVID-19 era, a year ago when you had $1 million, that's roughly about $3,000. But now, 12 months later, $1 million is less than $2,000. So you see, people rather save in dollars, in foreign currency, any of the major currencies. It could be pound, it could be euro, it could be dollars. But the favorite is dollars. Why? Because a lot of Nigeria, especially with medical tourism and even education, scholarship, people are sending their wards outside this country to study, and then they rather have the dollar. So yes, big time spending, I don't see them actually using that much, and that brings us to square one. Unless the CBN, in a way, takes other stringent measures to compel big spenders to also use the platform. But like a lot of people have expressed this skepticism whether that's going to happen. Yes, and I think I share in that cynicism actually.
Okay. Now, could you comment, on the readiness of the e-naira to stand the test of time? Do you think the Nigerian government is ready, to take on that path?
Yes. Well, you see, going by the antecedents of our monetary policies, and indeed beyond even monetary policies, other policy is that is sustenance, and persistence. Today, because why we have we are in this semi-economic quagmire, raging now close to 30 years, is because we have been inconsistent with our monetary policies and even fiscal discipline. But the CBN, largely is responsible for that. This inconsistency, for example, this minute they say, okay, we're going to give so value of the naira. Tomorrow we're removing the ceiling. Next tomorrow, another policy. For example, again, another example is when the CBN, being the apex bank, this differential in the value of, there is official rate, then you have the parallel market. And that there is a lot of pressure there. So sustainability and consistent, going by the antecedents of the CBN and successive government, I don't see that. Unfortunately, I have also reservations about that. But then let's be on the side of optimism. Let's see the cup as half full rather than half empty. So yes.
Yeah, some will say that the biggest elephant in the room is the issue of how can Nigeria export more, to strengthen the naira and all of that. It seemed like that's where to focus.
Yeah.
So how is this e-naira thing going to help local manufacturers to be able to, export more? That way, maybe we'll have a chance of strengthening the naira.
Yeah, well, that is the crux of the matter, because the value of a nation's currency, more often than not, is determined by one of these factors, is production, not consumption. Nigeria's economy is touted as the biggest on the continent, but an economy that perhaps is judged by consumption. We have virtually become a net importer from a net exporter. In the 70s and even up to the mid-80s, Nigeria was a net exporter, and that's why the value of the nation's currency was very strong vis-a-vis other foreign currencies, especially the dollar. At a point, the value of a dollar was just 75 kobo to the dollar, but now look at it, it's 570 something now, as of yesterday. Now, how would you stimulate production? You look at the variables. What could first, we just listed one now, where there is insecurity, capital will not stay. Capital will not be domiciled there. That is one. And then there is energy, raging energy crisis nationwide. I don't know your neighborhood. In my neighborhood, you will rarely get maybe 24 hours in maybe 3-4 days. There was a time at a stretch we suffered blackout for 5 days. I is here in the central business district. So all these factors that would eventually, whether electronic or physical naira, would determine the value of the nation's currency. Production, most of our the base or the primary products are sourced here, but the production processes, you have to first, the machinery, they are not locally fabricated. You may have the primary produce here. Look at agricultural based primary produce. They're here in abundance. Some other countries come here, they take this primary produce, go add value to them, then return them, and we consume them at a much higher cost. Take for instance rice production. If you look at the value chain of rice, or look at crude oil, the mainstay of our nation's economy. If you look at the crude oil, there are so many additives. The value chain is enormous. There's bitumen, there's the gasoline, there are so many. But then what do we get in return? We take this crude oil out there, then you bring it at a much higher cost. Why? Because our refineries are not they're not producing. And even if they are producing at maximum capacity, demand outstrip supply. There will be that. What fills that vacuum, that gap? So these are factors that, yes, in the final analysis, the e-naira may not stimulate local production because of these factors I said. Primary produce are there, but then other production processes, the machinery, even the know-how, the managers. Over in the past, when Nigeria was a net exporter, most of the technological and technical know-how they were indigenous, but now with the downturn of the economy, a lot of brain drain, a lot of experts took flight elsewhere, playing their trade, either they're indigenous or foreign. So even that, you're going to have a lot of problem with that. Unless you're able to get all this into the mix, perhaps when China devalues its nation's currency, if you look at the value of the yen, is compared to the dollar. And that's why China economy is galloping, literally galloping, because it's an economy that is backed by production. The value of the yen is compared to the dollar is not much, but because they're exporting, when you need to export, you have to devalue your nation's currency. But we're not exporting anything, and we're devaluing the nation's currency.
Terrible indeed.
So sad. So sad. Well, you know, others have also expressed reservation, you know, specifically bankers. They are skeptical and they feel threatened, you know, by this in-era thing. You know, it looks like something that is going to take away their customers.
Absolutely.
And a whole lot of, you know, concerns are raised about that. How are they supposed to position themselves in this instance?
You see, commercial bank, I think this is the problem with commercial bank. They've not been, apart from perhaps personnel management, they've not been thinking, they've not done traditional banking the way it should be done. Most of them are dependent on public sector funds, which are limited now. If you take away public sector funds from commercial bank, most of them will go under. There was a time major MDAs were asked to domicile their account in the CBN, and the commercial banks were gasping for breath, literally. Now, they will feel threatened because with the e-wallet, with the e-naira now, the Apex Bank is literally a bank, you and I. Unless they key in and then locate how they're going to perhaps maintain their customers, I see a lot of banks going to have a tough time. So it's understandable if they're uncomfortable with this new development. It's understandable because they have left traditional banking to rely more on, if you like, on one single public sector funds, and that's why the cutthroat competition.
But don't we stand the risk of, you know, rendering more people jobless, and you know, having more jobless people when we need to create more jobs? You know, and is this a concern?
Well, with automation, banks have rendered a lot of people jobless with automation now, which is the way to go. A lot of people will be out of a job unless these individuals, and not because of the e-naira. We might know the in-era with the dawn of technology, and like I said, with automation now, if you go, most of the banks, I mean most banks, and this is worldwide, self-serving. You go there, you can even deposit independent of the cashier. You can go to the bank, you deposit, you know, the same way you withdraw from automatic teller machine or ATM. So yes, a lot of people will be rendered jobless, especially in the banking sector. And with time, progressively, as we perfect digitalization, as we perfect the understanding of the digital world, a lot of people, unless they also eventually people, young people especially, give themselves new skills, they may soon be out of they'll be out there in the job market seeking for jobs there, and they've been taken over by automation or by machines, literally.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, with the unveiling of the e-naira, one would say on the Punch newspaper right here, it states that Central Bank of Nigeria alerts banks to risks, fraud, and threats. Could you comment on that?
Well, you see, even without the e-naira, well, that's the difference now between the e-naira and perhaps when people hack into bank accounts. I remember one of the leading commercial banks, I think one of the top three, there was a time, you know, some hackers actually withdrew hundreds of billions. It's just that it was kept hush-hush. So now, unless some of this bank, I mean, up their game, they face a lot of risk. But the joyful thing is the CBN has taken a lot of spend a lot of energy to protect such likelihood happening. So yes, I think it's not a misplaced alert given to the banks that they have to up their ante. There are banks that, you know, or like they say, the e-naira, or like when you do online transaction, is protected in such a way that it can easily be, your funds can easily be manipulated or being taken away from your account. Yes.
Well then, quite a lot of issues really. I mean, if we can continue to talk, it's inexhaustible, on the issue. Yes,
I'm
but
not an economic expert, but to my understanding,
a lot is associated. We'll see how it all pans out.
that is it.
Another story that got my attention is NLC is already rejecting compulsory COVID-19 vaccination. We are aware that in some states, the issue of compulsory vaccination is already ongoing, like in Edo State, I recall. Is there a cause for alarm here?
Well, I think this has to do with whether the workability of that. Like you said, Edo State blazed the trail. And then the federal government also took that cue. And eventually Kaduna, and I see more states doing that. And as usual, playing politics with it. Why? Because they say unless civil servants get vaccinated, chances are that they won't, like in the case of Kaduna, they've given a deadline to the end of this month. Get vaccinated or some penalty is going to happen. It's going to be meted out. Like it happened in Edo, people turned to work and they were turned back unless you bring your vaccination card. Now, whether they're going to meet the deadline is another thing altogether. If the vaccines are available, but you see, a lot of education needs to be done. You are a civil servant, the rest of your family isn't. So if you get vaccinated, what happened to the rest of your family? Unless the government perhaps compel all other citizens to do that, I don't see that happening, because there are people who have been vaccinated before and they still get infected by COVID-19.
Exactly.
And some even die in the process. And again is the fact that, yes, there's been a lot of damage done to, up to this moment, there are people who are skeptical about I've gotten my second jabs, so I'm not talking, but there are a lot of people who think, some of us who have done that, are really, they're waiting for us, to perhaps get infected and die. I'm just saying, on a lighter note. So there are two people now, those who get vaccinated and those who are waiting for those who don't get vaccinated to die. And those of us who have been vaccinated waiting for those who have not been vaccinated to die.
Okay,
because, yes.
So would you say the reason why we're having vaccine hesitancy is because of the fact that experts have said, well, even if you take the vaccine, you can still get infected?
No guarantees. So no guarantees. That is it. And then you see leading figures in biomedical industry expressing their reservations too, saying they are not taking, you see, and then in these days we're in information age, digital age, something that happened in far-flung places like Australia. You see it in the instant. It's been shared. The CEO of Pfizer was asked, have you taken the vaccination? He said no, because he's not in the front line. And then he gave some excuse that's not really tenable, which has not sat well with a lot of people, giving credence to the conspiracy theories. I'm not saying it's real. I have taken my vaccine. I have encouraged members of my family to take. All my kids, my family members, they've taken that. But there are still people who are saying no, it's some kind of sinister conspiracy. Unfortunately, it's out there. I'm not encouraging it. But you see, compelling people, especially civil servants, it would appear that they're the easy dogs that can be compelled to do that.
I think we have to end the discussion here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We've been speaking with Ali M. Ali. He's the editor-in-chief, People's Daily, our newspaper reviewer on the dailies on Daybreak this morning. We appreciate your coming. Hope we have you again.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Goodbye, viewers.
When the situation where you find that
not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that